In this video, I'm going to expose the truth behind the common myths that hold families back from having the adventure of a lifetime. Hi, I'm Jimmy Mitchell from Families on the Horizon, and we're all about helping average families have not-so-average adventures. And today, I'm here to challenge the misconceptions you may have about full-time family travel and to show you what it's really about. So get ready to break free from the chains of these myths and discover the incredible possibilities that await you and your family. So the first myth is it's too expensive to travel with a family. Now, we've been traveling full-time now for 6 months as of the making of this video, and it's the biggest thing we heard when we talk to people back home about this trip. There's a lot of people we know that want to do a trip like what we are on, which is a full-time trip around Southeast Asia, but they tell us they cannot afford it because it's too expensive to do. Well, I'm here to tell you that this hasn't been the case for us. We've met a lot of traveling families, and I haven't met a single one yet that has said it's been too expensive to travel full time. If anything, if you live in a first world country like the United States or Australia or Canada, it is significantly cheaper to travel like this than it is to live in your own country. I would say, as an educated guess, we are spending about half of what we used to spend back in Australia when we lived full time in Australia. And we are doing a lot more things as a family and having a lot more experiences for that money. You see, it's not about spending less money. It's about getting more for your money that you spend. And of course, everyone travels differently, and I'm sure there's families out there that spend more than what they do back home. But for us, it was all about learning the strategies that makes traveling more affordable. Like, your two biggest expenses are going to be accommodation and food, and maybe attractions and things that you seek. Well, accommodation is quite an easy one to fix. You don't have to stay in hotels. There's a common misconception when people think that you're traveling with a family that you need to stay in hotels and premium accommodation. You'll find that a lot of Airbnbs are actually better suited to families because they have kitchen facilities and bedrooms. So what we do is we generally stay in a house or a condo with 2 or 3 bedrooms, and we try and stay for an extended period, which gives you a much cheaper price than what's advertised. And we also save a lot of money by not eating out 3 times a day. What we found when we first left is that our budget for food was actually quite high. And how we've gone about mitigating that and making our food costs cheaper is we actually go down to the supermarket and buy breakfast and lunch, and we'll generally have breakfast and lunch at home and then have dinner out. And this has saved us a ton of money when we've been traveling around. And that's why it's so important to find an Airbnb or accommodation that has a kitchen, because it's not really possible to do that in a hotel. Another way we found to save money when we've been traveling around and traveling full time is our transportation costs have been really low because we've been using a lot of public transport when it's available. So we've spent several months here in Malaysia, and the public transport system here is so good and it's so cheap. It would generally cost us a couple of dollars for the whole family to travel across the city. We met one family in particular that was a single mother who was traveling full time with her 2 children, and they worked out every single way to save money. And the fact of the matter is if there's a will, there's a way. And you shouldn't be using the cost of this trip as a reason not to do it, because there is ways of mitigating that cost. Okay, so we've got the big one out of the way, which is the cost of traveling and how people think it's unaffordable. So the next myth we're going to cover here is children will miss out on education and socialization. Now, of all the myths I'm going to share with you today, this is probably the one that affected us the most before we left. We had the business sorted, we had finances sorted, we had sort of the rough direction we were going to go sorted, we had where we're going to go sorted, but the education part, it scared us, quite frankly. We're not teachers, and I'm sure that a lot of people watching this aren't teachers either. While there's a lot of information out there on the internet on how to educate your children, it's a lot different when you're actually doing it. But what I found is I was pleasantly surprised how easy it is to actually homeschool and world school your children while you're on the road on a big trip like this. Because of COVID, so many online tools have popped up to help educate children, because you've got to remember, pretty much the whole world was homeschooling their children for a period of time during COVID. So all these tools have popped up to make it that much easier to do. And the thing is, if you're educating 1, 2, or 3 children, let's say, as opposed to 30 kids, it's actually not that hard. And that was the biggest myth that we fell into when we came in this about the education side, is that we thought we had to spend 6, 7 hours a day educating our children. And we quickly found out that 1 to 3 hours a day is plenty when you're only teaching 2 children, because we can sit there and focus on what they're doing. Now, there's other benefits to world schooling and to homeschooling your child on the road, and that is the interaction they have with nature and the environment when you're out traveling. Now, it's nothing against classrooms and traditional education, but it's very difficult for a teacher to really explain what the Eiffel Tower looks like or what Angkor Wat looks like. You can look at it in books, you can watch YouTube videos, but there's nothing better than touching, feeling, and holding something to learn what it's about. And a good example of this is when we went to the Borneo rainforest and we learnt about pygmy elephants. No book can mentally prepare you for seeing one in real life. And the boys were obsessed with animals for that week period. They were looking at all the animals, making notes of them, trying to draw them, identify what they were. And that's worth so much more than traditional education. Now, don't get me wrong, we still traditionally educate our children too. We do English and math, but we let the social studies and the science and the geography, we let the world teach that part, and we just focus on the English and math. The other part of traveling full-time with kids and educating them at the same time is that if you have a genuine interest in learning things, that will rub off on your kids so much more than them sitting in the classroom. So whenever we go to a country and we start to look at what we're going to do and landmarks and stuff, we get the kids involved. And then when we're out there, we actively ask them questions of where we are. And it's amazing how much they retain of the information that we've been sharing with them and the stuff that they're learning by themselves. They're teaching themselves to be critical thinkers, and they're teaching themselves to self-teach, which is a really critical skill as you become an adult, as we all know. Now, socialization. This is a big one, and it's a question that we ask ourselves regularly. It is harder to socialize your children when you're on the road than it is when they go to a traditional school environment. I will acknowledge that, and I think that that part of the myth is true. But to say they don't socialize at all and they lack socialization is a complete and utter myth. Our kids are meeting new people, new environments, new experiences, other kids, other world schooling families. They're meeting them all the time on the road. So instead of maybe having 20 kids that they go to school with and maybe 2 or 3 close friends, they're meeting hundreds and hundreds of kids, hundreds and hundreds of adults all the time. And a lot of the socialization concerns that parents have can be mitigated when you're traveling by attending world schooling groups and meeting other families on the road and having play dates and joining in local activities. Our boys are doing boxing when we're on the road. So they go to boxing classes, then they meet other kids and they meet other adults and they learn other languages. So only time will tell if the socialization part is an issue for our children as they get older. But for now, it looks like they're having a good time and it looks like they're meeting a lot of new people. So now that you're a little bit more confident with the education side, let's talk about myth 3, which is it's impossible to maintain stable routine and stability for kids. And I can see why people think that this is an issue. You're not getting your kids up at 7:30 to have breakfast, to go to school, to leave school, to go to structured sport, to brush their teeth and go to bed. I can understand why that stability would be important to have in a child's life, and I can see the value in that. But I would say that travel provides a different form of routine and stability. And what I mean by that is that our kids still have a daily routine. It's just a lot more flexible and relies a lot more on the child to make their own decisions about what to do, which I think is a better way of doing things. So our kids still get up in the morning and they still go and they put their clothes on, they get breakfast and they watch TV, and at 9 o'clock they start their schooling. Now on some days, they may not start their schooling at night. They may not do schooling at all that day, but they know that that's still part of the routine. And the stability comes from their ability to adapt their routine to what's happening. The goal of traveling full-time, or part of the goal of traveling full-time, is to build resilient world citizens. And the way you build resilient children is to get them comfortable with being uncomfortable. And now for some children, routine is an absolute must, but for most children, they're quite adaptable and they'll adapt to the environment that's around them. So I acknowledge that there's less structure and there's less routine since we've started traveling as opposed to what we had at home. But I would say, is that a bad thing? I think being flexible and adaptable is a skill that a lot of children lack. And traveling full time has given our kids a real world reason to become more flexible and adaptable. Now, you may argue that having stability and routine creates familiarity and comfort. I don't disagree with this. But there's more than one way to create comfort and familiarity in your kids. For instance, they brought teddy bears from when we went to Australia. They also get on calls with their friends. They also play Roblox with their friends. All this stuff helps to create comfort and familiarity. And I would argue that the kids are probably less homesick than we are because they're adapting to the environment, they're adapting to the changes better than we do as adults. I think the thing is, people don't give children enough credit for their ability to adapt the environment that they go into. We've seen this personally when we've been traveling around, and we've seen kids that have a lot less than our kids do, and they seem just as happy in the environment that they're in. Now, the next myth is kind of half true, but it's funny, but it's also a big myth, and that is traveling with kids is too stressful and challenging. And I will be the first to admit that it is pretty stressful traveling with children, and it does certainly have its challenges. But to say it is too stressful and too challenging, I would argue that point. I feel like a lot of the stress and the challenge comes from the fact that the kids are there and you still have to move on with life. We still have to work, we still have to get our day-to-day errands done, and the kids don't have to worry about that stuff as much. When they're not in school 7 hours a day, you have less time to do that stuff yourself. And a lot of the stress and the challenge with kids comes from keeping them entertained. And that doesn't matter if you're traveling or whether you're at home living a normal day-to-day 9-to-5 life. What I will say is that even though it's stressful and challenging, the rewards of putting up with that stress and challenge is so much better when you're traveling full time than it is at home. You think about it, right? Your kids are stressing you out, or they're challenging you, or they're really grinding your gears at home. There's no reward for that. You just go through the same thing every day. Whereas if your kid's stressing you out or is a challenging day for you with your kids, generally it's because you're doing something exciting or new or novel that they're uncertain about and you're uncertain about, or you're trying to organize something, and the payoff is the fact that you're going to do something awesome, or you're in an awesome place, or you can go for a walk and see a brand new surrounding. Now, there's certainly ways to mitigate that stress and the challenge of taking your children traveling with you. And that is things like packing essentials and packing toys and building itineraries around what they'll enjoy as much as what you'll enjoy. And I'll do a whole other video on things that will help reduce the stress of traveling with kids. But all I wanted to say is that it's a myth to think that traveling full-time with your children is too stressful, because it's just as stressful at home, except you get the added benefit when you're traveling of seeing new environments and doing new interesting things. So the final myth I have here is that it's not safe to travel full-time with kids. And I've heard this one thrown around every now and again, but it's a complete and utter myth. For better or worse, when you're traveling full-time as a family, you're spending a lot more time together. And because you're spending a lot more time together, you've got the power of a pack. So if we go out and we're running errands, or we're out on an adventure, there's always the four of us. You got me, Pauline, and the two kids. Now, I would argue back home, half of the day, our kids were by themselves, or with teachers, or in an environment. And how many people do you hear of that get the kids snatched up leaving school, or them walking home from school and stuff like that? That just doesn't happen when you travel full time. You're together as a family all the time. And it really depends on the countries you visit, but the countries we're visiting in Southeast Asia are some of the safest countries on the planet. I have never felt unsafe walking around Malaysia, and I've spoken to Pauline about this, and she's never felt unsafe either. Because in these countries, people tend to do more things at night. So at nighttime, there's more people walking around, there's more things happening. And yes, obviously there is different risks involved when you're traveling full time. Instead of, the safety of your home, you're in an Airbnb that someone else may have the key of. When you're traveling around in taxis in Southeast Asia especially, they may not be the best equipped from a safety perspective. Yes, there is risks involved, but I would argue those risks are everywhere. So this is a myth, because it's not any more risky traveling full time as a family than it is staying at home and going through your routine, because people don't realize at home, and when you're doing the 9-to-5 grind, there's just as many risks. They're just not as visible. And there is ways of mitigating the risks of traveling full time, because there is an element of risk when you travel anywhere. Doesn't matter if it's with kids or not. One of the ways you can do that is choose family-friendly destinations. You can look for places that locals take their kids to. You can choose child-friendly accommodation that has maybe more security, or you can choose countries with low crime rates. It really comes down to how much you feel like it's a risk and how much you want to mitigate it. And I think it's also important to understand the local customs and laws. A lot of the reasons people feel unsafe in countries is because they don't adhere and obey to the local traditions and customs of the countries that they visit. The old saying goes, it doesn't matter if you're traveling or not, if you make waves, eventually you're going to get dumped. And the best way not to make waves is to just do as the locals do in the countries that you visit. And another way to mitigate risk when you're traveling full time and make it safer is to really think about the transportation safety measures that you take. The beauty about things like Uber and Grab is you can pick the quality of car that you travel in. If you really are that concerned about the car that you're driving in, get a Grab Plus or an Uber Plus or an Uber Black. These cars are more modern and they have more safety features. You can also get asked to get cars that have safety locks. You can also ask for cars that have baby seats. It's just a matter of asking, and yes, it may not be as cheap and you may have to wait, but people are more than willing to accommodate you if you want to feel safer in your transportation. It also comes down to choosing reputable bus lines and airlines and things like that as well. And you also want to make sure that you have communication and emergency preparedness. So for us, for instance, our boys carry around a AirTag or a Samsung equivalent AirTag. And the reason for that is, yes, there is a risk like anywhere else that someone could pinch them up. So we have AirTags on, making sure that we have emergency plans. What happens if one of us goes missing? What happens if one of us gets lost in a pack? How do we get in contact with each other? Do we both know our traveler's insurance, what it covers and what it doesn't cover? These are all important things to plan before or at the start of your trip. And another thing you need to do is familiarize yourself with local emergency services and what the local emergency numbers are and things like that. The best way to mitigate risk when you're traveling as a family to feel safer is to trust your instincts. Don't walk down a dark alley at nighttime if your gut is telling you not to do that. Don't get in a taxi if you feel it's unsafe. It's the same things you do as a parent at home, you just do them abroad with a different set of risks. So that's it, guys. Hopefully I've debunked a few myths that will make you think about traveling full-time, because it is awesome and it's been a life-changing experience for us. And I really want you to consider traveling full-time as an option. If you're stuck in the 9-to-5 grind and you really want to change, you want to get closer as a family, it's one of the best ways to do it. Now, guys, I know some of you are new to this and are wanting to learn more. So obviously make sure to subscribe to this channel, because all of our content is on tips and tricks on how to become a full-time travel family and how an average family can have some not so average adventures. But also, I've pinned in the description a link to our newsletter. And in our newsletter, I give weekly tips on ways to improve your travel experience when you're overseas. And this will become critical if you do decide to pull the trigger and travel full-time as a family. So thank you very much, guys, for watching, and I'll catch you in the next video.